Missed. Do you even know what objection means? The judge's voice dripped with sarcasm. Laughter rippled across the courtroom. But the girl didn't flinch. She stood there calm, silent, wearing a hoodie and sneakers like she'd wandered in by accident. Except she hadn't. She came for a reason. And by the time the hearing was over, they would all remember her name. It wasn't the crime that made this case unusual. It was who dared to fight back and how she did it. In a room full of polished attorneys, aging judges, and sharp suits, one quiet voice shattered everything they thought they knew. Thank you for being here. Sometimes, the smallest moments carry the greatest meaning. Today's story is one of those. Quiet, powerful, and worth remembering. If it touches your heart, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. And if you'd like more stories like this, you're warmly invited to subscribe and tap the bell so you won't miss the next one. Now let's take a closer look at what really happened. The courtroom at Willow County Courthouse wasn't usually this full. But that day, it was standing room only. Everyone wanted to see the girl. Some came for gossip. Some came for judgment. Most came to watch her fail. Her name was Avery Langston, 17 years old, black, quiet, and standing trial without a lawyer. She entered just before 10 a.m., her sneakers squeaking on the polished floor. Baggy jeans, a pale sweatshirt, no parents in sight, no public defender, just her, and a folder in her hand. Judge Leonard Kessler adjusted his robe and squinted down from the bench, already annoyed. "Young lady," he said, voice thick with suspicion. "Do you even understand what you're being accused of here?" Avery looked up at him, her voice steady. "Yes, Your Honor, I do." That answer, it made him flinch. Kessler leaned forward, glaring. "This isn't your high school debate team, Miss Langston. This is a court of law." Laughter broke from the gallery. Low and mean. Someone muttered, "She'll cry before lunch," but she didn't cry. She stood still, as calm as Stoic, and scanned the room. People in business suits, some whispering, some smirking, none believing. And yet she didn't look away. There was something behind her eyes, not fear, not confusion, something colder, sharper. Determination. Judge Kessler shook his head. "I don't know who thought it was a good idea to let you speak on your own behalf. You're not equipped for this." And she didn't reply right away. He took her silence as weakness. Smirked. That was his mistake. The district attorney, Miles Rothman, a tall man with slicked back hair and a polished voice, stood to begin his opening statement. "This case is simple," he said confidently. "The defendant was found at the scene, with the tools. With motive, we have what we need." He barely glanced at Avery. Didn't see the way her grip tightened around her folder. Didn't notice her eyes narrow just slightly, until she spoke. "Objection," she said quietly. The room froze. Even the court reporter looked up. The DA turned around, confused. "I'm sorry." Avery stood straighter. "Objection," she repeated. "You're making assumptions about my intent without providing context. That's speculative and inadmissible." A wave of confusion swept the courtroom. Judge Kessler blinked. "Miss Langston," he said, tone almost mocking. "Do you even know what that means?" Avery didn't hesitate. "Yes, Your Honor. I do," the DA scoffed. "Your Honor, this is. What's irregular?" Avery cut in. "Is the lack of any direct evidence tying me to the supposed crime." Her tone never wavered, not once. The judge pounded his gavel. "Miss Langston, this is not a performance. One more outburst and I'll hold you in contempt." She nodded. "Understood, Your Honor." But the room had changed. Even the gallery felt it. Whispers stopped. A shift was happening. Subtly but undeniable. "Permission to approach the bench," Avery said. The room gasped. Judge Kessler's jaw clenched. "You don't get to make demands in my courtroom." "I'm not making a demand," she answered. "I'm exercising my right to present a fair defense. Unless, of course, Your Honor feels biased. In which case, I'll be filing for judicial recusal." A long pause. You could hear the hum of the ceiling lights. Then, "Fine," the judge growled. "Approach." As she stepped forward, her steps quiet but deliberate. She handed him a stack of neatly printed documents. No cover sheet. No frills. Just fact. The Judge Kessler frowned as he flipped through them. "What am I looking at here?" A preliminary review of the evidence submitted by the prosecution, she said calmly. Half of it is circumstantial. The other half lacks proper chain of custody. He stopped flipping. You prepared this yourself? Yes, Your Honor. He looked up at her again. Longer this time. And how does a high school student know how to draft something like this? She tilted her head. I read, she said. The courtroom went silent again. But this time it wasn't judgment. It was curiosity. Judge Kessler sat back, his fingers drumming the edge of his desk. Not out of boredom now, but calculation. He glanced once at the gallery. People were whispering again. Not mocking this time. They were curious, uneasy. He turned toward the prosecutor. Mr. Rothman, he said slowly, would you care to explain these documents? The DA stood stiffly. I haven't reviewed them yet, Your Honor. The judge looked at Avery. You're telling me you reviewed every piece of submitted evidence? She nodded. And the inconsistencies were hard to miss. The judge flipped to a page marked in yellow. Chain of custody is broken, he asked. Yes, sir. Exhibit B. The surveillance footage was retrieved from an unverified source. There's no timestamp. And the metadata shows it was edited. The judge's brow furrowed. Rothman cleared his throat. Your Honor, the footage clearly shows her at the scene. No, Avery said softly, stepping forward. It shows a girl who looks like me near the scene. But without a timestamp and verified chain of custody, it could have been from any day. Any week, Judge Kessler turned to her. And how do you know this? I had it analyzed, she said. She reached into her folder. This is a forensic report. It outlines all the irregularities. A bailiff retrieved the document and brought it to the bench. The judge read in silence, then leaned back. Face unreadable. This report says the file was altered after it was first obtained. Yes, Avery confirmed, which makes it inadmissible as evidence. The DA looked ready to object again, but he hesitated. He didn't have a rebuttal. He didn't even have a backup plan. This wasn't the script he'd memorized. Let's talk about Exhibit D, Avery said next, returning to her desk. The confession. She held up a document. This was taken after 4 hours of questioning, without a lawyer, without a guardian. I was 16, under federal law. This is a violation of my rights. You didn't request counsel, the DA said, trying to recover. I didn't have to, she replied calmly. Minors are entitled to legal representation. Automatically. That's the law. A pause. She stepped forward again. And even if we pretend that confession was valid, the document is full of holes. She held it up. The address listed. I've never lived there. It's public record. Judge Kessler turned to Rothman. Is that true? The DA fumbled with his paperwork. I'll have to confirm. You don't have it? The judge asked sharply. Rothman's mouth opened, then closed again. No answer. Avery didn't gloat. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't smile. She simply said, You assumed this case would be easy. You assumed no one would fight back. She paused. But here I am. The gallery murmured in response. People began to shift in their seats. Some leaned in. Some looked down. One woman in the back wiped her eyes. Even the bailiff was starting to look impressed. Judge Kessler tapped his gavel once. Enough, he said. Then, quieter. Miss Langston, what are you trying to accomplish here? She stood tall, hands lightly resting on the table in front of her. I'm trying to show this courtroom that justice isn't about appearance. It's not about who speaks the loudest. It's about truth. And the truth is, this case is built on assumption, not evidence. The judge leaned back, stared at her. You're not just a smart kid, he said finally. You've done more homework than half the attorneys who come through here. He turned to Rothman. This is troubling, very troubling. The clerk confirms everything. Rothman sat seething, his entire strategy shredded, in public. Then the judge asked the question. Miss Langston, he said, you're not a licensed attorney, are you? She paused. Then, clearly, yes, Your Honor, I am. Gasps. From all sides of the room. I passed the California bar exam last year, she continued. You can look me up. Avery Langston, State Bar ID 936271. A silence. The judge turned to the court clerk. Confirm it, The woman began typing furiously. The sound echoed. Everyone held their breath. 10 seconds passed. Then 20. Then. She's telling the truth, the clerk said. Bar certified. Licensed. Voices filled the room. Someone clapped. Someone else gasped. She's 17! Reporters were already reaching for phones. Judge Kessler slammed his gavel. Order! Order in the court! Thing he looked back at her. You're telling me you graduated law school past the bar before turning 18? Yes, Your Honor, she replied. No tutors, no firm backing you. No, sir, I studied. I read. I passed. The judge stared at her, his expression blank, and then, just a whisper of a smile. You could hear a pin drop. Even the humming fluorescence overhead seemed to quiet. Judge Leonard Kessler leaned back slowly in his chair, elbows resting on the worn mahogany arms. He looked not at his gavel or his notice but directly at Avery Langston, the teenager, the lawyer, the enigma. Then, like a man wading into deep water, he spoke. Well, Miss Langston, he began. You've certainly given this courtroom a great deal to consider. Avery said nothing. She didn't need to. The silence in that room was her statement. Kessler turned to the prosecution, his voice tightening. Mr. Rothman, I find your submission of Exhibit B, surveillance footage with altered metadata and no timestamp, unacceptable. Rothman's jaw clenched. He said nothing. Further, the judge continued, Exhibit D, the so-called confession, was obtained without counsel present. From a minor, that alone is grounds for dismissal. A still silence. Mr. Rothman, the judge pressed, do you dispute any of this? The DA shifted uncomfortably. No, Your Honor. He mumbled. It appears she correct. Judge Kessler turned back toward the bench. His fingers hovered above his gavel, pausing. In light of the significant procedural violations and the defendant's legal standing, I have no choice but to rule the following. He cleared his throat. Exhibits B and D are hereby excluded from the record. The remaining evidence is insufficient for further prosecution. The case is dismissed. And just like that, the courtroom fell apart. Gasps filled the air. One woman dropped her phone. A man in the gallery muttered, Holy hell. Avery stood completely still, cheer. She didn't smile. She just closed her folder. Judge Kessler leaned forward again. Miss Langston, he said, quieter now. I misjudged you. He exhaled slowly, like a man who'd just seen lightning strike. I assumed you were a child playing dress-up in a world too big for you. Avery looked up, softly but firmly. That's what most people assume. But Kessler nodded. Well, I won't make that mistake again. As Avery turned to leave, a woman in the gallery, mid-40s, gray suit, tears in her eyes, whispered, She's the future. Reporters surged near the doors. One got close. Miss Langston! Can you tell us how you managed this? What's your secret? Avery paused just long enough to look into the camera lens. There is no secret, she said. The law is supposed to protect everyone, not just those who wear the right suit, not just those who look like they belong. She glanced at the reporters, then the crowd behind them. I belong, and so do a lot of others you've overlooked. She stepped through the courthouse doors. The light outside was sharp and golden, the kind that makes everything look new again. A group of teens on the side walked up from their phones as she passed. One of them, black hoodie, shy eyes, said, You were amazing in there. Avery nodded politely. Thanks, and kept walking. Later that evening, the courtroom was empty again. The gavel sat untouched. The bench was cold, and the echoes of what had happened that day still lingered in the quiet hallways. Some janitor would sweep up the dust. A clerk would lock the door in the southeast. But what Avery Langston left behind wasn't something you could clean up. It was something that settled into the floorboards, into the memory of the people who'd watched her and doubted her. She didn't just win a case. She forced a room full of people, men in suits, women in pearls, old names with old power, to look in the mirror and ask, what else have we been getting wrong? What Avery did that day, it wasn't just about cleverness. It wasn't about some loophole or twist ending. It was about truth, the kind that doesn't shout but waits, patient, steady, and undeniable. She didn't humiliate her accusers. She dismantled them quietly, with facts, with law, with grace, and most of all, with presence. That's what shook the courtroom more than anything. She stood there like she'd always belonged, even when the room had been designed to keep her out. The next day, the headlines ran wild. Teen attorney shocks courtroom, wins own case. 17-year-old black lawyer dismantles prosecution. Avery Langston, the girl who knew too much. But the truth was quieter than the headlines. Avery didn't want fame. She didn't want the spotlight. She wanted accountability. She wanted people, especially those in power, to do better, to remember that justice isn't just a word, it's a responsibility, one that belongs to all of us. A week later, a local podcast interviewed her. The host asked, "Do you feel proud? Do you feel like you proved them wrong?" Avery's answer, "No," she said. "I feel like I proved something right." And then, more softly, "I'm not special. I just did the reading." The host paused. "That's a humble way to put it." Avery replied, "Being underestimated isn't a tragedy. Letting it stop you is." Across the country, schools began sharing her story. Law professors added her courtroom speech to their syllabi. Young girls, especially young black girls, started asking new questions. Could I do that too? Is law school really out of reach? Can someone like me change something? And the answer was no longer a quiet maybe. It was a firm, undeniable. Yes, Avery Langston didn't change the law. She reminded us how it's supposed to work. She reminded us that credentials are earned, not assumed. Intelligence doesn't come with a dress code, and greatness often walks in wearing sneakers. She didn't just win in court. She won the long game, the one about perception, about dignity, about rewriting the rules by knowing them better than anyone else. Some say they saw her a few weeks later, sitting on a bench outside a library downtown, reading again, notebook in her lap, no cameras, no speeches, just her, preparing for whatever came next. Because people like Avery, they don't walk in for applause, they walk in to change things. And quietly they do. There's something powerful about quiet strength. Avery Langston never raised her voice. She didn't shout to be heard. She just knew her truth and trusted it enough to stand alone. In a world that often overlooks, dismisses, or underestimates, she reminded us that dignity doesn't have to be loud to be unshakable. She reminded us that the courtroom isn't just a place for judgment. It's a stage where character reveals itself. And perhaps most importantly, she reminded us that no one is ever too young or too underestimated to make a difference that echoes. So the next time someone questions your worth or doubts your voice, remember Avery. And ask yourself, what would I dog if I stopped letting the world define me? Because maybe, just maybe, the most powerful revolution begins in silence. With someone who reads, prepares, and refuses to sit down quietly. If this story moved you, even just a little, I'd love to hear what it meant to you. Was there a moment that gave you goosebumps? Or a line that made you pause? Please share it in the comments below. Your voice matters here. And if you'd like more stories like this, quiet, powerful, and worth remembering, you're warmly invited to subscribe and tap the bell, because sometimes the next story that changes your life starts with a voice you didn't expect.